It is day 21 of this war in Ukraine, and there are fears tonight of some of the worst atrocities of the war so far. But there are also embers of hope from the negotiations. A report in the Financial Times cites 3 sources involved in the talks, claiming significant progress has been made on a 15-point peace plan. The report claims the deal includes a ceasefire and withdrawal of Russian forces from all territories seized during the invasion. For that to happen, Ukraine must renounce its ambition to join NATO and also agree not to host foreign military bases or weaponry in exchange for protection by Western allies. But for now, the military onslaught continues. In Kiev, 2 residential buildings were shelled by Russian forces this morning. The second city, Kharkiv, remains under intense bombardment. And in Chernihiv, Russian soldiers allegedly shot dead 10 people queuing for bread. Thousands of people have now been allowed to leave Mariupol, but there are fears tonight of mass casualties in the bombing of a theatre being used for shelter. A warning, my report contains images, including of those who have lost their lives, which you may find disturbing. Mariupol is under constant attack, even right outside one of the few functioning hospitals. The emergency unit here is overwhelmed. One of the last places you can still bring those injured in the shelling. The hospital is running out of supplies. Nothing is getting in. Other hospital wards have been totally destroyed, including the maternity unit. So they improvise. What a way for these newborns to come into the world.
Да, посмотрите, вот лежат дети накрытые, чтобы стекла, потому что там мы были, здание разрушилось, и все полетело на нас, мы оттуда детей выносили просто. Смотрите, вот эта аппаратура перестанет работать, и все.
There is no way to get the injured out of hospital to safety. And there is nowhere to put those they cannot save. The morgue across town is not accepting bodies. So Dr. Valery Drenga says they've put the dead where they used to store the food.
Потому что остальные больницы разбомбили. Сейчас и никто не забирает. МЧС нет, никого нет. Родственники, я не знаю, куда мы их девать будем, как хоронить. В общем, могил без понятия даже. На 17-м больница не принимает, БСМП не принимает. У нас последняя вот эта вот территория, где привозят раненых. Все, больше пока некуда.
The trauma, even for experienced medics, is too much.
Ну, ко всему привыкаешь. Ну, потом вечером это с головы не выходит.
The people here are left pleading for help.
Помогите! Это город жилой, жилые дома, СОС! Помогите Мариуполю! Убивают детей, женщин, больницы переполнены. Мы все здесь на что? Это ж я не могу понять, это геноцид?
28,000 people managed to leave the city yesterday, many escorted by the International Committee of the Red Cross. But hundreds of thousands are still in Mariupol, and tonight there is disturbing news that a theatre, seen here being used as a shelter, has been destroyed by shelling. The deputy mayor of the city has told Channel 4 News 1,000 people were there, but he does not know how many got out or have been killed. Russian social media channels claim it was a military target used by the Azov battalion of Ukrainian army. The capital, Kiev, woke to this. Russia still claims, as it must to avoid admitting war crimes, that it only aims at military targets.
Ну, я надеялся, что такого не может быть в Киеве. Потому что здесь нет военных объектов, здесь только дома обычные. Здесь нет промышленных объектов.
Russia says Ukraine is using civilians as human shields. that images issued by world-respected news agencies are either propaganda or unintended collateral damage.
Слава Богу, нам повезло, что нас не убило, не ранило.
If there is a ceasefire coming, then it is too late for the 10 people who were queuing for bread this morning in Chernihiv, to the northeast of Kiev. The draft peace deal says Ukraine should be neutral. How people here are supposed to be neutral after incidents like this has not yet been drafted. So for Ukrainians under bombardment, nothing much has changed. But on the diplomatic front, there are some positive noises. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, said today specific wordings of a deal are close to being agreed. President Zelensky said negotiations are becoming more realistic after yesterday admitting that Ukraine would never become part of NATO. But in Moscow, Vladimir Putin continued to justify the invasion, railing against Western sanctions and blaming Kiev for the loss of Ukrainian lives.
The fundamental problems for Russia's future, Ukraine's neutrality, Ukraine's demilitarization and denazification, we are ready to discuss at the talks. Our country did its best to hold these talks, understanding that every possibility to save lives must be used. But we see time and again that the Kyiv regime, ordered by its Western masters to create an anti-Russian offensive, is indifferent to the fate of the Ukrainian people.
Well, our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, is in the capital, Kiev, and joins us now. Lindsay, what do you make of this draft plan?
Well, Christian, I think that your report shows both how difficult and how necessary it is. I was just speaking to a senior member of the Ukrainian administration here. He said, yes, the talks are continuing. It's a process that is not stopping. But at the moment, it has no relationship to what's going on the front line. Now, what are the bare bones of it? The bare bones are that Ukraine would become a neutral country. It would not join NATO, and its army would be limited. And in return, Russia would withdraw from Ukraine. But there's a lot else going on in that as well. There would be the status of Crimea. It would have to be accepted as part of Russia and not part of Ukraine. And the separatist statelets in the Donbass would also, they would be frozen in place. Now, for the Ukrainians, this is a huge sacrifice, but if they get peace, it's worth it. Now, it was interesting to note today that Joe Biden offered the Ukrainians vast amounts more weaponry, 9,000 anti-tank systems, 800 anti-aircraft systems. What's that about? Well, if you had a ceasefire, the danger is that Russia would just stop, regroup, rearm for another offensive. But with that offer of weapons, the Ukrainians could do that too. They could say that we are also going to rearm and be ready to fight more ferociously. And at the moment, as we know, the Russian offensive has not gone according to plan. So I think both sides at the moment are trying to negotiate from a position of strength. The other thing that the Ukrainians would need if they were going to agree to anything would be security guarantees from the West, from Western countries and possibly from Turkey. So I think there's a long way to go on these negotiations. But goodness me, the Ukrainian people need a ceasefire as quickly as possible.
Lindsay Hilsum in Kiev. Well, earlier I spoke to Alexander Danylyuk, a former Ukrainian finance minister, and I asked him if there is this sort of peace with these kinds of conditions, will the Ukrainian people accept it or want to fight?
Look, as you understand, that is a big risk when then the people may not listen. I think he will. That will be a challenge for him, but hopefully he will achieve it. The result. But if there is any kind of split, Russia will exploit it as well to destabilize country during these difficult times. So it's a critical moment now. Stakes are very, very high. Responsibility that Zelensky is taking on himself is extremely high. But we all wish him luck and success in these negotiations.
This draft plan effectively forces Ukraine to give up its constitutional desire to be part of NATO. Is that something Ukrainians will be prepared to do?
Many Ukrainians are disappointed with the behavior of NATO over the last 3 weeks. And even the level of approval of Ukraine joining NATO dropped by 6 points over the last a week or so, because we really expected more from NATO, like more kind of commitments, more willingness, and kind of, willingness to help Ukraine, to fight with Ukraine. Although we obviously, some countries help us, but others were just expressing their concerns. So I think for some Ukrainians it will be easy to accept. For others it will be difficult because they don't believe Russia, they don't trust Russia, and they do trust NATO as a big defense line.
Yes, in the last half hour, President Zelensky has put out another message on his Telegram channel, which is very critical of NATO and is effectively trying to argue that the Ukrainian people are going to have to accept that they have been let down by the outside world. Is that how it feels now?
Not by everyone. For me, I'm a bit frustrated myself, to be honest, although I've been working for many years actually to make the joining NATO a reality. But I think what Zelensky is doing now, it's actually part. You need to look at this statement as in the context of negotiations. He already trying to test the grounds for this message. If that will be the part of the agreement, he already kind of trying to communicate it to prepare the society. Ukrainians learned over the last 3 weeks that we could rely only on ourselves. It was a very hard lesson, very hard lesson. But I think at the moment, like, we're all committed to fight till the end, and we believe in our victory.
Do you think if President Zelensky had said a month ago that Ukraine will not, in reality, be part of NATO, that the war could have been avoided, or would Russia have invaded anyway?
He would, Russia would invade anyway. For Russia, they want to get control over Ukraine. At the moment, what they learned is that they received a very strong resistance that they didn't expect. And now they're looking also for the way out. But for that, they need to kind of save face, which is, which is obviously not an easy thing to do now. And I think one of the way to do it is actually, getting this trophy that Ukraine will not join NATO. They will need to sell it to Russians, and Zelensky will need to sell it to Ukrainians.
Mr. Danilyuk, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, addressing a joint session of the US Congress, President Zelensky today called again for a no-fly zone. But failing that, he said, send more weapons. And within hours, President Biden announced millions of dollars worth of new military equipment. Our Washington correspondent Siobhan Kennedy reports.
Not since Winston Churchill in 1941 has a foreign leader addressed Congress in a time of war. So it was today that President Zelensky, with his country under Russian bombardment, made this direct appeal to his US counterpart.
The President Biden, being the leader of the world, means to be the leader of peace.
In a speech that was delivered mostly in Ukrainian, Zelensky invoked the memory of Pearl Harbor and 9/11, hoping that by remembering their own pain, Americans would step up further.
In the darkest time for our country, for the whole Europe, I call on you to do more.
As he has done on his virtual tour of Western parliaments, Zelensky urged Congress to provide more defense systems, fighter jets, tougher sanctions, along with this passionate plea.
Russia has turned the Ukrainian sky into a source of death. To create a no-fly zone over Ukraine to save people, is this too much to ask?
He knows it is, because policing that zone, the US believes, could bring American planes into direct confrontation with Russia and spark a wider conflict.
Good afternoon.
But President Biden, flanked by top officials, did offer another $800 million worth of military equipment.
The American people are answering President Zelensky's call for more help.
That help will, for the first time, include sourcing long-range anti-aircraft systems to combat the barrage of Russia's ballistic missiles.
But the American people will be steadfast in our support of the people of Ukraine, and we're going to continue to have their backs as they fight for their freedom, their democracy, their very survival.
Having their backs won't include US boots on the ground, but are there any circumstances that could lead to direct US intervention? I asked the top Republican on the Foreign Affairs Committee as he left President Zelensky's speech this morning. On the use of chemical weapons, just to clarify, you think that should be the US red line?
If chemical weapons are used or nuclear, short-range tactical nukes are deployed by Mr. Putin, I think at some point we have to decide, is enough enough? So I think the discussion of red lines we need to start having.
Are you having that? Is the administration having that?
Yes.
And do you think that Putin could use chemical weapons? Is that likely?
Unfortunately, it is likely.
President Zelensky has said he believes that too.
Thank you. Slava Ukraine.
Hence his desperate pleas for US help to end this war before Putin turns to even darker means to try to end it himself.
Siobhan Kennedy in Washington. Well, of course, talks of peace are very far away for those living under daily shelling. Earlier, I spoke to Maria Avdieva, a security analyst from Kharkiv, who, despite the heavy attacks on the city, decided to stay in order to collect evidence. And I began by asking her what a ceasefire would mean for her and for Kharkiv.
Well, I hope that it will actually happen, because what I see now for the 2 days in a row is a constant shelling that does not stop day and night. So every hour I hear the shellings. Sometimes they're closer, sometimes they're more in a distance, but they do not stop. Yesterday, Russia was again bombarding Kharkiv residential areas with the cluster munition, which is prohibited and which is a war crime. And I have been today to the place, actually the apartment building, which was hit by this rocket. So, of course, any possibility should be used when we will stop this war and when the Russia will stop bombarding and killing civilian population.
Do you think the Ukrainian people would accept President Zelensky saying Ukraine will not be part of NATO when this is something that is in your national constitution?
President Zelensky has now huge support among Ukrainians. Well, he and his other members of the president's team are now, people watch them all the time on their social media and everywhere, because they give the people of Ukraine this hope and this possibility to believe that the peace is very close. You know that President Zelensky has signed this letter that Ukraine is started this way to be part of the European Union, and now this is also going on. So this part is already what Ukraine has achieved and is on the way to achieve. Speaking about the NATO membership, I think we should wait until the official Zelensky team and his press team will give the official information about what will be what will be in that deal and how it will look like.
Now, you are in the second city of Ukraine, and we've seen some horrific pictures of the damage that has been done there.
The historical city, the historical center of Kharkiv is heavily destroyed. I go there almost every day, and it is very hard to see Kharkiv like that, because many historical buildings which have historical value and were built before the World War or even in the end of 19th century are destroyed. So I don't know when and how Kharkiv will be rebuilt, but I hope that, and the president said that there will be special funds, and they are already created, where the money will be accumulated for rebuilding of Kharkiv, because I have never imagined to see Kharkiv like this. It is even worse that I have seen on the pictures from World War II, and this continues. So while we speak, the shelling continues and it doesn't stop.
You are just a few miles away from the Russian border. Can you imagine living in peace with Russians again?
It is hard to say, because what I hear from the people on the streets, they are really angry. They have never thought and believed that Russia will attack Kharkiv, because Kharkiv is a large Russian-speaking city, and people had some connections, especially before 2014, some relatives or professional connections, and it was unimaginable to think that Russian soldiers will come here with their weapons and start killing people here, start killing children and women.
Maria Avdieva, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.